First of all, let me just say thank you for having me. It is an honor for me to be here. I graduated from Stephen F. Austin in December of 2004. 3.5 years after I started. And yeah, I was proud of that too. And Mom and Dad were too, by the way. That was a little bit cheaper. And the only question I have is, it's been 14 years, and thanks for having me, Dr. Creech. Appreciate it. I'm kidding. I'm thrilled to be here, and this feels this feels like home to me because it is, and we'll talk about that a lot. He mentioned plant propagation. I get to teach plant propagation at Texas A&M, and kids are always asking. They're never asking, but they're always asking, "How do you know what you're doing?" You know. And it's nifty to be able to point to some of these pictures that I'll show you and say, well, we sort of have some clue as to what's happening there. And then also I will say this other thing, that my dad was a liberator of material. That's 100% true. But he didn't teach me near as much as Dr. Creech did. And this is being recorded, right? So I want this to go down on public record. But we got our first shipment of Taxodium, Cascade Falls, Cypress. Dr. Creech signs the materials transfer agreement. We will not cut it. All right? And then he looks at me and says, cut it. I don't feel like it was. Anyway, he said, you didn't sign it. That's a lie. It's a lie. But it's a good story. He asked me what I wanted to talk about, and at the time I had no clue, so I came up with some silly title, and then I had to stick with it. So here, you can take the boy out of East Texas, but you can't take the acid-loving plants out of his garden. And people asked me what I was going to talk about, and I told them, I said, I've got no clue, but I'll tell you when I'm finished. And the fact of the matter is that I've even taken some, kind of looked at myself and said, are you sure you can take the boy out of East Texas? I'm here every weekend. I come back from my refresher course once a week. I get to come back to the loblollies and breathe again, and some azaleas and some camellias and some different plants that are acid-loving, and so that's important. King's Nursery, this will always be one of the most important things in my life, which is 4 generations, not 3, but 4 generations. Yep, sorry. My great-granddad started in 1915, but that's not even true, we don't think, because I did a little landscape project about 3 or 4 years ago for somebody in Timpson, and they said, my great-granddad bought a pecan tree from your great-granddad, and we saw his grave, and he died in January of 1915. So it had to have happened before that, but this was the first invoice we could find from 1915, so we went with it, nice round number, if you will, and so we've been there for 103 years. Where the name of the firm indicates the class of the stock. This is an old slogan, and we haven't used it for a long time, but we've used it on our 100th year T-shirts, and I'm proud of that. It wouldn't fit on a business card, so we had to shorten it. But anyway, it's a great legacy as far as I'm concerned. And people ask me, is the 5th generation back there in the back corner? I don't know, and I don't really care. But it is good to have been from this group. This is not my great-grandfather, but I could convince you that he was. It wouldn't really matter. And apparently there were no child labor laws in 1922 or whatever this was. So we got kids out there picking strawberries, and they're probably picking, and eating more than they're picking. And they would put these on the train and send them over to Shreveport, Louisiana, and make a pretty good little bit amount of money on that crop. And then a few people in Tenaha decided that was a good idea. And so 4 or 5 other strawberry farms popped up, and he had to move in a different direction. And he started growing fruit trees, roses, and all sorts of other different bare root crops, and just never really looked back from there. We have pictures and pictures and pictures of lines of arborvitae that seem like they stretch for miles, and they're out there proud of their arborvitae crop, and so those are things that make me proud as well. This is my great-grandfather. This is my great-grandmother. This is Joseph Bernard King, Sr., And this is Katie King, and proud of them. This is my granddad, whom I knew for about 5 years before he passed, and my great aunt, who actually was a nurse here in Nacogdoches, Mary B. King. This is my grandmother, Margaret. People ask about her far and wide. I can go to San Antonio, Texas, and I'll find somebody. Is your grandmother still at the nursery? Just the other day, I was teaching nursery management and production, which is always funny to me because I think about when I took nursery management and production. And anything that I took from Dr. Creech, and this is not a lie, anything that I took from Dr. Creech, it was hard to tell. I'd have a Creech class at 8, a Creech class at 9, and maybe one at 10. And it all started sounding very similar. So I would call it Creech 1, Creech 2, and Creech 3, right? And my Creech 1 and Creech. But as I was teaching nursery management last week, one of the students said, well, Dr. King, what about your nursery? And I said, yeah, my mama's, that's her nursery, and she's running it. Who's she got working for her? And I said, my grandmother. And they said, nuh-uh. And I said, yes, absolutely. They said, we don't believe you. And I said, well, just a second. I pulled my telephone out, and I called them, and I put it on speakerphone. I said, Graham, and she said, yeah, hon, what you doing? I said, these folks won't believe that you're my mother's only employee. She said, yeah, all I do is answer the telephone, and I can't hear good. I didn't ask her permission to be able to tell that story, but anyway, this is my granddad. Quite honestly, 4 generations worth, probably the best horticulturist of us all. Many of you knew my dad, Aubrey, quite well, and he was probably the best people person of us all. But nonetheless, this guy right here knew his plants and knew how to propagate like nobody's business, and I wish I had just 1/10 of his ability and information that he had in that. My mom didn't know I was going to show this picture. This is them on vacation, which didn't happen very much. This is mom and daddy on vacation, letting their hair down in Gulf Shores, and 2 folks on the planet that are some of my favorites for sure, and I know that a lot of people love them as well. When Daddy passed, Greg Grant, I asked him to write a little bit for the funeral, and he said, as you know, he typically has a way with words. The great news about the King's Nursery when Aubrey and Cheryl were there was the synergy there, and I'm sort of paraphrasing this, but basically, Dad would talk to customers and Mom would load mulch. And so from this guy, I got the ability to come and talk to you folks. And from this gal, hopefully I got a little bit of an ability to work hard, because she sure does that. Proud of the family, proud of the legacy, and proud of the fact that we're 4th-generation horticulturists. And Daddy used to say it's a wholesome way to make a living, and I can't think of anything better than that. So I left Tenaha, and I was thinking, well, I sort of left Tenaha. I lived there for 2 years, and then I came over here, and I made the big move to get an apartment in Nacogdoches, and still drove home probably 4 times a week. But nonetheless, moved over here, and there was nothing that I could not do, right? I just knew for a fact. Honestly, at that point in time, I thought I was going to move back to Tenaha and do what my dad and granddad and great-grandfather had done. But there wasn't anything I couldn't do. I knew for a fact I could do anything that I set my mind to. My mama had told me that, and I just knew it for a fact. So I was the outstanding horticulture student. I was trying to find a picture of me with the big Amorphophallus titanium, and this is the best I could come up with. Okay, good. That means you got to have me back at some point in time. But anyway, this guy, I don't know if he regrets allowing me to be outstanding horticulture student, but I certainly regret, some of these choices that I had made fashion-wise and things like that. But ultimately, I guess we all do that sort of thing. I knew I could do anything in the world. I knew Daddy used to say he thought he could root a number 2 pencil. And I kind of got that. I thought I could too. And I honestly, you couldn't convince me otherwise, because in Dr. Creech's plant propagation class, I started trying to propagate Shishiohime or Otohime, one of those Japanese maples out there that's about this tall, beautiful. And I said, I'm going to do it. And he said, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. And so I get out there and I stick them, and they lose their leaves, and then they start rooting. And I said, I told you, no problem. So I thought I could do anything in the world, and ultimately I knew, well, it wasn't crossing the bridge when I first got here to get across the creek. I was crossing the pipe. I was running across the pipe. And then they built the bridge, and that's kind of tame. I kind of like the pipe myself. There was always a chance that somebody was going to fall in, and those were good times. Anyway, and that was always kind of funny to me that there was all this sort of discussion about, is this bridge safe or not, when we were crossing a pipe to run across the creek. It's sort of an interesting thing. But nonetheless, I thought I could do anything in the world, and I could go across the creek here and plant some squash, and I made 4 bags of squash in Dr. Leon Young's class, and boy, I was growing plants. And believe it or not, our family could grow plants in containers, but we really weren't gardeners because we didn't have time, to do it. So this was some of my first gardening experience. Also, I'd like to also say, when I see Dawn here, I'd like to say thank you, and I'd also like to apologize to her because she was my first boss outside of a person named King. And the first day I was there, I went over to the Master Arboretum and I cut down one of her native clematis. And I don't think she acts like she doesn't remember it, but I remember it vividly. She also one day met me about midway through my career here, and she met me on a Monday morning, and she said, "Come with me." And that's never good when Dawn says that. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, "Come with me." And so we walked halfway into the garden, and there sits our gator that had set out all weekend long. And I was supposed to have put it up on Friday. So I learned a lot of lessons from you, and thanks. Well, water under the bridge is a good thing because before you know it, I thought I could do anything. So I got my mama decorating this bridge, and I got some of my best friends down in Lenana Creek putting hula hoops down there and tea candles. And they make it look like this so I can ask my sweet wife to marry me. And this was, yep. So this was, well, I know how long I've been married. I don't remember how long I've been engaged. That doesn't really matter. And she's outside right now, so we're good. Anyway, this place means a lot to me. This place means a lot to me, too. As Dr. Creech mentioned, I went to Texas A&M not long after I graduated from here. And this morning I showed some of the folks in my class this picture, and they said, "Dr. King, why are you showing them this?" And I said, "Well, this is the campus." They said, "Well, this is not the side of the campus that you work on." I said, "I know, but this is prettier." So here's our Texas A&M campus, and there's the train, and now there's tunnels to get underneath, and we're making everything so easy on everybody, and it's just a problem, We used to have to wait for the train, and it's not that big a deal. Ultimately, this is a place where I felt a lot of hope when I first got there, and I still do. It's been about 10 years. I started there in August of 2007, so that's 11 years. Oh, yeah. So anyway, I got a master's and PhD there, and a lot of life happened while I was here, and my wife and I have lived there for a vast majority of our marriage, and we love College Station. As Dr. Creech mentioned, we can pay $480 million not on a stadium, but on a stadium renovation. All right? Now, the problem that we have with that is when we pay $480 million on stadium renovation, the horticulture department wishes we could get a new dumpster. All right? So that's one of our issues. But nonetheless, there's this little hotel over here, and there's all kinds of things happening. Money is changing hands all over the place, and it is kind of fun to watch, quite honestly. You got this this is the hotel that he was mentioning. It doesn't look like much now, but I hope they've closed it in since then. But anyway, our mascot is not Reveille. Our mascot is the crane. So all over campus, you can see cranes no matter where you go. And ultimately, we're just, again, spending money left and right. And you've got to figure out how in the world we can ever come up with that much money. And the fact is that we have trained them up since they were young. All right? You think I staged this photo. It is 100%. I just was there, and it presented itself. This is my little boy, oh no, in all of his Aggie glory. He is at our plant sale last weekend where we've taken cash at this particular table, and he is calculating it up, making sure that nobody's sticking any in their pocket. You may say that we Aggies sort of, and if I'm really an Aggie or not has never been clear to me. I really am a lumberjack at heart, but I bleed a little bit of purple and maroon. Whenever Stephen F. Austin comes to College Station, I root for a real good game. Anyway, a lot of people think we look through maroon glasses or we read the maroon redbud leaves, but a lot of other people think that we're trying to infect people with the Aggie spirit. The fact is that I had a colleague in the back that had the flu, and so we're just trying to keep from getting sick. But the thing that I love the most about what I get to do at this point, and I think, honestly, if I could be totally frank and forthright for just a second, the thing that I loved about what Dr. Creech did for so long, and included me in, thankfully, is that these students are important to me. And I know they were important to him as well. And I get to sit there in a point where they're still somewhat impressionable and get to tell them what I know and what I think and the facts that we come up with through our scientific discoveries. And so these are fantastic, not only students, but they're fantastic people. And I've already had a number of former students come back and make me want to cry, as far as saying nice things about me. So it's always a good deal. They built this ziggurat at the Texas Nursery and Landscape Association Expo in San Antonio last few months ago. And they said, Dr. King, we want to build a ziggurat. I said, what's a ziggurat, right? And they're not only do they know what it was, but they could build it. So they built this along with all this landscape, and really impressive kids. Along with them, there's 68,000 others. Texas A&M is growing exponentially, it seems. And whether it's good or whether it's bad, it's not really up to me. We just teach the ones that come, and we're excited to have the ones who are interested in horticulture. This student right here, I don't know why I threw this picture in. He's just been a fascination to me. Last semester, he came in every Monday dressed like this with his pizza box. Every Wednesday, he came in a shirt, t-shirt, shorts, and tennis shoes, and a backpack. And I said, what is going on? He said, I lost a bet. He lost a bet, and he had to wear this Trump outfit, basically, and then he also had to bring all of his books and notebooks in a pizza box. So I just thought that was fascinating. I don't know what they're up to these days, but it's some interesting stuff. Texas A&M Horticulture, that's our strange-looking building. It's been there since the 80s, but it's a good place to work. It is probably, from our most recent tally, it's probably the third largest horticulture department in the nation. Which is not necessarily a good thing because we don't have as many students as we used to have, but we're proud of where we stand and we're proud of the work we get to do. So with all that being said, there's nothing bad going on. It's all positive. It's all, again, maroon colored and everything's rosy and we feel good about it. Well, that's not exactly true. We have one small problem. Well, we have two large problems. We have at least two large problems. And there's a little hint here. This is one of our iconic water towers on campus. And if you can look real closely, and you can't do it with the naked eye, but you have to get a telephoto lens out. If you look very closely with that telephoto lens, this is what you see. We have salty water in College Station. It is incredibly salty, all right? And nobody's ever seen that before. This is brand new, so I'm anxious to get back to the College Station and let everybody know that I found this. But ultimately, we have salty water, and that does a number on, well, a lot of things, but it does a number on plant materials. Salt exclusion, for instance, on this little dogwood right here, this is a little bit of salt exclusion. They're trying to exclude that salt, but ultimately it's causing it to die out on the edges, and that happens all over the place in College Station. It also then makes our soil look sort of like that, especially in the summertime when it's dry. We have saline sodic soils, which I'll explain for a second what that is. But there won't be a test at the end, I don't think. But anyway, the saline sodic soils are no good for plants either because they also contain sodium and other salts, all right? It causes all sorts of chemistry issues, but it also causes all sorts of physical issues from the salt perspective. So we have soils that hold water like this, all right? One of the kids saw this picture and said they were just talking about a roommate of theirs that needed to take a bath. And I said, well, this looks like a good place, right? So we have all sorts of places on campus that hold water because of our clays. If you notice, this particular dividing line that changes, or that basically divides the low pH soils from the high pH soils, it's not exactly true, but it's close, is right around the I-45 corridor, which means if you drive down that way and you want to grow something, you want to grow an azalea on the left side, you can, and if you want to grow an azalea on the right side, you can't. No, I have students that actually believe that. But But the fact of the matter is that that's a fairly good indicator of whether you have low or high pH soils. What difference does that make? Well, on campus at Texas A&M, they just recently did some soil testing and they found some 9.1 and some 9.2 pH. And that is like, why even try? All right? And of course, Dr. Creech and Greg and a bunch of other folks up here have been saying that, A&M been saying that for a long time. Why even try? But the fact of the matter is that it is an issue for sure. pH, of course, is a logarithmic scale, and so you get your acidic pHs down here in the 1s and 2s, and your alkaline pHs up here in the 14s and 13s, and it's all a bunch of chemistry that I won't talk a whole lot about because you already know it. But most horticultural crops grow between 4 and 8, not 9.1 or 9.2. And the major effect pH has on crops is the solubility of the nutrients. All right, so we see things like, well, acid soils typically happen over here in our more basic areas, and our basic or alkaline soils typically happen in our more arid regions, and we get these saline sodic and saline sodic soils that we talked about earlier. Anything between 5.5 and 6.5 is real good. What do y'all have here? What do you feel like you got here, Dr. Creech?
5.6 to 6.5.
See? The rich get richer. You'll notice 9.1 is not on this table. All right, now listen, not all of the campus is 9.1, but while I'm poor mouthing, just let me go. All right? You'll notice that real acidic, you do lose, you lose the ability the plant loses the ability to take up a lot of these primary macronutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but for the most part, a nice acidic soil is really nice. Things up here, pH is up here in the 8, 8.5 range. You get some primary macros that are available, but a lot of your micronutrients give you some trouble in that case. All right, so here's the deal. Up here left in Nacogdoches, you can grow acidic plants. In Crockett, you can grow acidic plants. I pass azaleas through Crockett all the time. In Madisonville, Huntsville, all right, I pass these things. You can see beautiful acidic loving plants. In Hearn, you can go and see some beautiful gardens in Hearn. I don't know necessarily why you would, but you could if you wanted to. There are, unless you live there. Navasota, if you pass through there going to Houston or whatever the case might be, you can see some nice gardens, and of course that's a beautiful place. This is the kicker. Caldwell, on the other side of College Station, there are some beautiful gardens that are there based upon some of this sandy acidic soil that has sort of washed around because of these floods that have occurred over hundreds and thousands of years. So, all of this is really in good shape as far as that's concerned. Boy, we talk about growing some nice, acidic, loving plants. Guess where you can? Right there, College Station in Bryan. And that X proves it, 100%. All right? So, we just sit there and we think, all right, well, let's go to work. All right? We get all kind of deficiencies, nitrogen and iron deficiencies, and I won't bore you a whole lot with that. This is nitrogen deficiency. This is iron deficiency on a crop. This is not nitrogen or iron deficiency, but it sure looks like it. This is up at North Carolina State at the, boy, I tell you what, I just all of a sudden, Ralston, thank you. I just got back from there not that long ago. Ultimately, this is a plant that I saw there, but it's been around for a long time, Drops of Gold, Japanese holly. And the reason I put this in here is because it looks like it's chlorotic, but this is something like that Dr. Creech would have made me absolutely love. Like I find myself loving the weird stuff and having a hard time getting excited about the mainstream stuff, which may say something about why, I don't know, commercial successes and whatnot. All right, this is a gardenia that is also not chlorotic. It's supposed to look that way, but that's what one would look like if it were chlorotic. This is the only plant that I saw all day long at the Ralston Arboretum that I felt like I could actually grow in College Station. So I took a picture of it and put it in here to remind myself of how lucky I was to be able to grow this one plant. This is Cypressus arizonica, the sulfurea, and it's actually a little bit yellow as well. And I love growing around there because you don't see anything that's just normal at that Ralston Arboretum. Okay, so that's what pH does to plants. This is what salt water does to plants, all right? This is, people think you've either sprayed with this with a herbicide or this tree's been waxed or whatever the case is, I don't know for sure. But there's not a leaf on this tree from here down. This is a sweet gum, all right? Now, we won't talk a whole lot more about that. Same thing here. Not a leaf on this tree. This is where the irrigation water hits this plant, okay? So everybody accuses us, the horticulture department, of having gone out and done this because it's so perfect. I promise we didn't. I just went out and took a picture. This is a Yopon holly. We have killed a Yopon holly, okay. And this is magnolia. This is little Jim, and it doesn't look too bad, but it doesn't look too good either. And so ultimately, that's what we wind up doing to some of our different plants. Yeah, probably so. But you know what? We're optimistic. So as I mentioned, all right, I'm not here to just make everyone feel sorry for me, although, if you want to, feel free. Because we love what we do and we think there's an opportunity to make things better, always. If we live in a place where it's tough, then for those who don't live in a place that's tough, maybe we can do some work and make things even better in the first place. This is what I was used to, a dogwood that looked like a dogwood. And it was beautiful, and it had this little blood-good Japanese maple behind it. This is up in Dallas, or this Viburnum macrocephalum, the sterile cultivar that is so beautiful. And, I thought I could grow this when I moved down to College Station, and it didn't take me long to figure out that I could not. These are some of those azaleas that are up there, and I think this is kind of ironic that I would show these because there was, again, truckloads of East Texas soil, I believe, brought in to be able to produce this up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But still, beautiful nonetheless, and those are the kind of things that you're thinking about. This is some George Tabor azalea that we were, growing there at Tenaha, and I thought I could do that in College Station. Thought I could grow Japanese maple when I got down there. Nobody ever told me there was salty water or there was clay soils. No acid-loving plants in my garden. What do you mean by that? No thanks, Dad. Like, you take me to Tenaha every week, and I see what it can look like, and then you all of a sudden bring me back down here, and we got St. Augustine grass. This is awesome. He says he's fixing to take off if it's not something that we can change. So what's the guy to do? Well, we could do a number of things, but you just start working. And I worked on some drought studies and some salt studies, as Dr. Creech mentioned. And really what you find when you do that is, what's the quickest way I can kill this plant, right? And this is really funny because I would call my grandmother and she'd say, "What are you doing today?" And I said, "Well, I'm out here measuring death, on these plants." She said, "Honey, what are you doing? You're growing them so you can kill them?" And I said, "That's what they tell me to do, so that's what I'll do." And ultimately, that was a good experience, clearly because, salt and drought are important drought everywhere in Texas. If you've noticed our water patterns, they kind of come and they go as they want to. Salt, of course, in the central and western part of the state, also very important. I also find myself doing, now this is not illicit, this is good, okay? Find myself doing things I never thought I'd do in the first place, which I teach a course called, and the name is so long I forget what it is sometimes, but Wild Edible, Cultivated, and Poisonous Herbs. Yeah, you can come take it. Feel free. And so there was no medicinal plant class on campus, but at A&M I can't call it medicinal plant because the College of Medicine would get upset. So I said, all right, well, we'll just name it something real long, and so everybody will have to call it medicinals for short. Ultimately, we make some essential oils in there. That's mint. All right? And I'm sort of relegated at some point in time to getting kids excited about these little droplets right here. They say, "Oh, look at that, dude." And it's kind of an interesting thing because when I was here, I was sitting out there excited about the variegation on those leaves. And my students are excited about making some little mint oil and things like that. But, I'm not belittling that by any stretch because I'm fascinated by it as well. I decided that I would teach plant propagation. I might as well know something about tissue culture, and tissue culture is a really neat way to propagate plants. And at A&M, we were really blessed to be about an hour to an hour and a half away from a really nice tissue culture lab, and then I get my students to do some tissue culture as well. And they're absolutely fascinated with the ability to take a small little piece of a plant, technically one single cell, although we use many more than that, and ultimately make a bunch of new plants, and I get them coming back at the next year and always saying, my African violets are doing great, and that's always fun. Now, some kids sneeze in their Petri dish, and so we get some interesting science experiments as well. I also find myself going to the library a lot because that's where I can see pretty plants. You know, you can do it online or you can go to the library. I go to the library, I found this book on rare plants of Texas, and I see that there is a native Styrax and a native Philadelphus, some acid-loving genera, all right? And these guys are not necessarily acid-loving. They're from down here in the central Texas area, native to there. So at least I can give myself some hope. I've even decided to give myself some hope that there may be, at some point in time, a camellia that I can grow in some more alkaline soils. And somebody said, well, how do you know that? And I said, China's a mighty big place. And there's got to be an alkaline soil with a camellia on it somewhere. And so we're going to try to figure that out. And I know there's work being done there. Azaleas, they've already found some alkaline tolerant azaleas, but there's a lot of work to be done. So what about this? All right, I've decided I can't grow an azalea in my garden. I can drive by the azaleas as I come home. What can I do to make sure that I can stay in contact with these plants that I love? Well, a study abroad. I got a good friend, a good colleague. She was on my hiring committee at Texas A&M, so she has impeccable taste. And anyway, she's there, and the first time I ever went to her office, I said, we should work together a bunch, and she said, okay, pretty skeptical. And I said, I'd always wanted to go to England and look at some different gardens and study those there. And she said, yeah, that'd be fine, never thinking anything would ever happen. And next May, we're going to take our first trip with 25 students to the UK, Scotland, and Ireland. So we're really excited about that. Now, having said that, last May, I went on a 10-day journey to the UK, Scotland, and Ireland, or to England, Scotland, and Ireland. And that was with my wife, my little one, and that colleague that I mentioned. Now, he was, how old was he? Somebody in the corner? I don't remember. Somebody do the math. 9 months, something like that. And everybody said, you're doing what? We're going to go for 10 days. We're going to see 18 or 19 gardens and garden centers basically in 7.5 days when you take out all the travel. It's ridiculous. Why would you ever do this? And I said, well, because I don't want to leave them here. So we took them, and they went to everywhere we went and had a really good time. And he particularly loved Stonehenge because he was able to take his shoes off and run around in the grass for the first time in 10 days. But man, he was having a good time. And when he first got on the trip, this is what he looked like. You know, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to go. And I'll show you in a second what he looked like when we finish. You get off, he's laughing right now or crying one or the other. He said, yeah, that was a stupid move, bud. I don't know what you were thinking. You get off, or off the plane, you get out of the car at Oxford, and all of a sudden your IQ just feels like it goes up 20 or 30 points, you know, which for some of us is quite significant, if you think about it. Anyway, these buildings, just beautiful, make you want to go check places out. I found my rhododendrons. This is at the Botanical Garden in Dublin. Really, really a beautiful garden. And one of my favorite gardens, National Botanical Garden, Dublin, is a place that reminds me very much of a Mast Arboretum in the fact that it is run basically like a trial garden, and that really attracted me, as you might imagine. Sissinghurst, which I had heard people mention Sissinghurst since I could remember, the White Garden in particular. I was there, and I did like the White Garden, but this is an area that I'm sort of drawn to, where you've got these azaleas. They used to be many, many different colors. This Harry Nicholson and Vita Sackville West ultimately got a hold of this thing in the 30s, I believe, and started working on it, and they worked on it till she passed away. They put these azaleas in, and they were grafted. And ultimately, the scions died, but the rootstocks came back, and they're beautiful. So, you know, even when things don't go the way you planned, that's okay. Also wisteria. This is Floribunda cultivar alba, the beautiful plant. But it just, it just sort of spoke to me when I was there, and I absolutely loved this. This is a place called Doik, up in the northern part of, up around Edinburgh. Spelled Daywick. We kept asking for the Daywick Garden, and they kept looking at us like we were from Texas. Anyway, we found Doik, and this is a beautiful place as well. This is the spring garden, or the alley of limes in the Sissinghurst garden as well, Tilia, that are pleached. And anywhere else on earth, we'd say, what a horrible thing to do to a tree. But there, it looks right. And of course, they revere horticulture there. And when we take our students in May, that's one thing we hope to encourage them with, which is, there are places all over the world that are sort of like this. And just because, in some instances, some of our students feel a little bit beaten down because they chose horticulture or they chose agriculture, it's okay, right? You can make a living. And there's a lot of places in the world where this is something that is considered to be a top-notch career. Just some beautiful, anything they touch grows over there. They sort of reminded me of Tenant Hall. Green up and brown down, and you're okay. Weigela, variegated Weigela, which I just absolutely adored. This is a garden called Great Dixter, where everything's too close together and it's all jumbled up, and it makes some pretty pictures. So that's one reason to go back. Lilac, this is so frustrating to me because, anybody that comes from the north, that's your first thing you want to grow. Well, where are the lilacs? Well, here's your crepe myrtle. Enjoy it, And the fact of the matter is, I think Greg's got some lilac out there and that he's been messing with a little bit, but they're just not happy. But man, this was a beautiful plant. So we started thinking, all right, everywhere we went, we said, what would we do? How would we do this if we were going to do it? Now, if I was going to do it in Nacogdoches, I'm sure y'all could come up with all sorts of different, maybe some different hydrangeas and things. Maybe this viburnum that we talked about a little bit ago. Couldn't do that in College Station, so I might use some little Chinese fringe tree in that case. Now, Kenanthus retusus is one of my all-time favorite plants for a lot of different reasons. Of course, Wilson Drive, beautiful, and this particular one is maybe one of my favorites all together. This is in Dr. Bill Welch's front yard, and this is a seedling that was selected there at Tom Dodd's nursery down in South Alabama. And beautiful plant. It makes a bunch of seedlings as well, and so he's been giving them to me for the last few years, but really, really full. We went to Chelsea Flower Show. Nobody ever told me what Chelsea was. We loved it. Don't get me wrong. We're not going to take our students back, and I'll explain for just a second. So no one told us that when you go to Chelsea, you go there to wear hats and drink. All right? And I didn't have a hat on, nor did I partake that particular day. But what we found was it was a place to see and be seen. And it's a beautiful place if you can see it, but there are so many people there. I don't have a good picture of it right now. But man, there were hordes of people. And so our students, we thought we might get them into more trouble than they needed to be. So we were going to skip that one. But it is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of a thing. Lupines, that kind of just makes you mad, doesn't it? Anyway, we got our bluebonnets. That's good. This is Powers Court Garden up in Ireland. It's a beautiful garden, massive, and we were there at 4:15. They closed at 5, and he said, I won't even attempt an Irish accent, but he said, good luck. He said, you got roller skates? And I said, I forgot them at home. But anyway, we made it through and had a really good time, and we will certainly go back to this place. Beautiful gardens. And this is what you look like once you've done 7.5 days, 18 gardens, garden centers. He just writes the material for you, He's great. So you begin to appreciate the little things in my position. As far as getting, Dr. Creech and I were talking about, students. And when I was here and the students that I knew and a lot of the students that I still know are absolutely crazy about plants. And in order to continue to produce more of those people, I think that we got to be positive about things. And so I don't talk about the pH being bad all the time, and I don't talk about the water being bad all the time, but rather we talk about the things that we can grow and the positives about those things. You know, Japanese persimmon, you'd sit there and say, well, that's nice, but there's an incredible ornamental factor here. And there is for a number of months after these, especially after these foliage has fallen. This is a picture my dad took. But absolutely beautiful, and of course it's incredibly useful. This is the way my granddad nearly lost his life when he was 4 years old. My great-grandmother told him, said, JB, if you pick another one of those Japanese persimmons, I'm going to wring your neck. He'd eaten so many of them. In that particular afternoon, a customer came up, and my granddad was in the tree. And they said, JB, what are you doing? He said, Mama said if I pick another one, then I'm going to get in trouble, but I can eat them up here, and I'll be fine. So, appreciate the little things here. Cotoneaster. This is not a plant that I would have ever here in Nacogdoches. I mean, I loved it, but it's not a plant here in Nacogdoches that I would have ever said, yeah, let's think about this. But this thing right here, think about all the little sort of the 4th of July factor that I like to call it, which is the raining down of the fireworks, you know, at that particular point, the way that sort of cascades. The textures begin to sort of speak to you when you begin to think about horticulture and begin to love it in that way. This is right outside the Smithsonian there in D.C. This is just Abelia, but it's kind of got an interesting texture as it sort of cascades down off that wall. It's not like Cotoneaster, but it has somewhat of a similar effect when you allow it to do that. So you begin to think about the smaller things. Forsythia, you know, the beauty that it provides in the early part of the year when there's not a whole lot of it around. But man, the little striations there and all of the interesting textures that come along with sort of its irregular growth habit. A little sword fern here. I got 2 ferns back to back in these slides, but ultimately this is the nuttery at Sissinghurst. When they first got there were hazelnuts planted out there. And so anyway, it kept its name even though they're not there at this point. But a beautiful texture, a beautiful color, and it's something that you should consider as you think about your garden. You know, it doesn't all have to be showy and flowery, for sure. This is, again, there in the, this is at the National Botanic Garden in Edinburgh, all right? And this was beautiful to me for a lot of different reasons. Of course, they can do all sorts of sedums and things, and they can, you know, cascade off of these rock walls with a lot of different things. You know, what would we do that with? And we began to ask questions of ourselves. In College Station, we could use all of these things. Dianthus and frog fruit, which I got a PhD based on frog fruit, so don't say anything bad about it. Texas sedge, silver ponyfoot, water clover, a lot of different plants. This is that silver ponyfoot. This is, well, I shouldn't have done this. This is not a good picture of my frog fruit, but it still is a tough plant. Marsilia, the water clover, bat-faced kufia down at Zilker Garden in Austin during the middle of the summer. So, you know, really, really good ideas of ways to sort of repel, or not repel, but allow cascading off of these walls. This is Texas sedge, Carex texensis. Have you ever thought about bark characteristics? It's at the Ralston Arboretum, and it looks like, again, something that was staged. And there, for a little while, I thought we were having a Dr. Seuss, you know. I actually had a student the other day, I have them do a little marketing project. Their idea for marketing is they're going to create a Seussian line of plants. I said, I don't even know if Seussian is a word or not, but you know, interesting. I kind of let them go with their ideas. But this guy had received some severe cold damage and was just being protected. But it did get me to thinking about some of these different. This is Myrtus fuma that we saw all over Ireland, England, and Scotland. And of course, when you think of this, we think about, you know, Lagerstroemia faria, our Japanese crepe myrtle that you can use and get a lot of these same effects. But man, just think about the peeling bark and the multicolored bark and just beauty in really very subtle ways. Of course, our Lagerstroemia alley up at the Dallas Botanical Garden, Arboretum, sorry. Anyway, you know, a lot of repetitive textures and things, and just just beautiful. This is a picture that Greg sent me a long time ago, but this is the Chiananthus retusus, the Chinese fringe tree that Heidi Sheasley has growing down at Tree Search Farms. I just saw it the other day, and it's one of my favorite trees on earth because Chiananthus is one of my favorites, and this is probably the biggest one that I know of. I know there are larger ones, but it's one of the biggest ones I can drive to. And so I just love the bark on this thing. It's so interesting. And so many people just think it's a species that blooms for 3 weeks, once a year. But really, it has 4 seasons of interest as far as I'm concerned. Beautiful architecture. This is Bill Welch's Chiananthus. And just looking up from underneath it, I mean, I would want to put a picnic table underneath there and just hang out. Or what's even better, let's put a more comfortable chair under there and hang out. That'd be even better. But anyway, bark and architecture is important. Japanese crepe myrtle, this is the one up at Ralston. This is Fantasy, but there's also Townhouse. They're both pretty good cultivars as far as I can tell. But this thing right here, think about how beautiful that is. Should have people laying flowers around it, how beautiful that thing is. I love the multicolor and what you can do with the bark. This is Frosty. Is this in the arbor? I think this is an arboretum. Frosty elm. Anyway, the musculature that you see here on this trunk should be something that you consider when you think about a tree. Think about planting a tree or think about planting anything for that matter. Styrax in Atlanta. And man, you talk about sort of braided together and basket weaving in the best way possible, right? If that was basket weaving, that's the class I would have taken. But beautiful trunks and things that don't get considered. This is Vitex at Dallas. And a lot of people don't think about Vitex in this way. But man, if you sit there and give these trunks a little bit of, get them a little bit of love and attention, they'll pay you back. And of course, we sometimes think of Vitex as a weed, but if we could have them look like this, I think there would be less of that. Speaking of weeds, this is Wisteria sinensis. All right, this is Chinese wisteria in Asheville at the Biltmore. But man, weed, aggressive, invasive, but still beautiful. All right, this particular point. I love, the musculature on that particular trunk. This is a rose that I saw over there, and this is a stretch, but even the prickles on this particular rose is just an interesting factor, an interesting feature. This is Rosa sericea, all right? And I don't know. I almost took this one out, but I decided I'd leave it just because it would get your mind wondering maybe what else could I put out there that would be interesting to somebody else. All right, just some interesting stuff that I thought. So we had, of course, the Aesculus hippocastrinum, the beautiful horse chestnuts, the Atropurpurea, the beeches over there. Trees just make me want to, they either make me want to dance, which you don't want to see, or, they make me want to quit. Ultimately, beautiful. And they're fantastic at all their arboriculture over there. All right. Plants that I wish I could grow. This Cornus angustata that I just saw at the Ideal Garden. I was looking up a little bit more info on that, and I found a blog by Creech that said it's a great plant. It could be invasive, but we'll see, or something like that. And hey, you know what? We've got uglier things that are invasive. So anyway, I'm a fan of that particular plant. I wish I could grow it. Heck, I wish I could grow regular dogwood, Cornus florida. I wish I could grow that blood-good Japanese maple in the back. I wish I could grow all those azaleas or rhododendrons. I wish I could grow that lilac. I wish I could grow that viburnum, and I wish I could grow hydrangea. But I can grow a lot of other things. I can grow Cordia boissieri, the Texas olive, that you could technically, I guess, grow it here, but you'd have to be real careful with it. We can grow that down in College Station fairly well. It's a beautiful plant. It's not one that, maybe you spend a lot of time thinking about, but it's a cool plant for us down there. This is Cordia parviflora, which not many people, or parvifolia, I think, which not many people know. It's little leaf Cordia. Out in the desert Southwest, we see a whole lot more of it, but it's got that sort of fountain and a lot of texture. as well. And, the blooms are not anything to write home about, but they're there. Iridia inaqua sandpaper tree. All right, this is not one that you want if you're trying to tie an outfit together via Adam or Eve. This is real scratchy. But it is an interesting plant. And down in San Antonio, you see them all over the place, lining the streets, and their trunks are gorgeous. And it's one I should have mentioned in the trunk section as well. Beautiful plant, but the trunks are really what it's all about. Again, Lagostroma farii, the townhouse or fantasy, those are both good. That Vitex, I can grow that. That Chinese fringe, I can grow that. That's one we need to see a whole lot more down in our area. And thanks to Dr. Creech and a lot of people here, we see it a whole lot here, and I'm proud of that. There's not a whole lot of places where I can go north, south, east, or west from Tenaha, and I don't see a Chinese fringe tree, and that always makes me think of my dad because he sold a whole bunch of them. This right here is a garden, a little piece of a garden in Ireland that you probably wouldn't think as much. It's not very beautiful at this particular point, but it's really interesting to me because what they did was they took every salvia they could find and put every salvia that they could find and put it into this bed. And so ultimately, you've got probably something like 65 or 70 different cultivars and 25 or 30 different species of salvia in this little bed. So don't leave confused, okay? What do you do with a tough spot? See, eventually I would come around to what we said I would speak about, which was basically how to garden in tough areas. I got one slide, all right? Raised beds. If you don't do raised beds in our area, you're in trouble. And raised beds here are good ideas, all right? Even in places where you got nice soils, raised beds are still a really nice idea, especially if you're trying to produce something that is a little bit, doesn't want wet feet. So consider that. All right, they're your friend. If we don't use raised beds, we got no chance down there. Spend more money and time on your soil. Spend more money and time on your soil. Now, I almost put on here what I'm about to say, but I didn't want it to be in writing. Now, they're recording me, so it's a problem. But from a nursery boy's perspective, I shouldn't say this, but you should spend at least as much money on your soil as you spend on your plants. All right? If not more. Because people are coming all the time saying, well, we tried this little spot. This has been the 7th time we've replanted it, but we think this is going to work this time. And I say, I appreciate the optimism, and I want to sell you some plants, whether it be at the nursery or whether it be down at our plant sale. But the fact of the matter is that's ridiculous. Go and work on your soil, all right, and then come back and I'll sell you some plants and they'll thrive. And then you can thank me later, right? So organic matter, I call that the magic pill. Organic matter is good for your soil if it holds too much water. Organic matter is good for your soil if it doesn't hold enough water. Organic matter is good for your soil if it's got low pH. Organic matter is good for your soil if you got high pH. Organic matter is good for anything that ails you as far as your soil is concerned. So peat moss, compost, if it's truly well composted, just about anything like that is going to help you out a ton. Proper tilling, not too much, but not too little. Working incrementally, which means don't go and dig out 8 inches of soil in your clay, if you got clay, and then decide that you're going to put a bunch of nice peat moss in there, because then you've made a bathtub, all right? Don't be afraid to fertilize. I don't understand exactly. I know people are more conscious of ecology than ever, and that's a good thing, but our plants need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and all those secondary macronutrients, and all those micronutrients. And so I have people, I say, have you fertilized? And they look at me like, what is that? What do you mean by that? So that's something to consider. Select plants that are tough. Hopefully you've seen a few that I've talked about here today. Don't be cookie cutter unless cookie cutter is what you're all about. And then it's okay. All right, you say, I want the cookie cutterist of cookie cutter landscapes. That's good. That's okay as far as I'm concerned. But don't be afraid to think outside the box. Spend time there. The area that you're having trouble with is you're probably having trouble because you don't ever go spend time there. All right, so if you're a gardener and you're actually out there, we tend to have these sort of at times when we'll spend a lot of time in places that are beautiful or that we're happy with. Spend times in areas that are considered tough. and refresh the location periodically, all right? The soil and the plants. Sometimes you just have to replant. I did a little landscape not too long ago that my granddad had planted some Burford holly, some dwarf Burford holly. And it was 45 years later. And they said, what do you think's wrong with them? And I said, I don't know what the life expectancy is on this thing since you've been cutting it like this all this time, but let's plant some new ones. And they said, all right, let's do that. All right? Don't leave confused. You got it good, but we all do. And I hope you are leaving encouraged. You guys have an excellent opportunity to grow some really cool plants here. And this is a great place to live and work, I know. And anyway, thank you very much.
Any questions?
Oh, yes. You know what I was thinking about? I was thinking about my talk. And I was thinking, I'm going to give a talk where no one can ask any questions. And I always heard, oh, you just busted the streak.
I was in Ireland and they had rhododendron there that had 12-inch tops.
Yeah.
Of margin. Apparently they got some rodent or something that takes the seeds and replants it and they consider it theft.
That's correct. Rhododendron, the specific starts with a P. I can't remember, but you're right. It is considered to be slightly invasive to highly invasive, depending on who you speak to. But those are the same species here that are beautiful in that garden and have never gotten out of, cultivation. So it all depends on where. So the whole invasive aggressive thing, we could talk for a long time about that, because to me, when they talk about Vitex and they start thinking about it being aggressive or invasive, don't use the same terminology that you use for kudzu. It's not the same thing, By the way, we've killed kudzu many times in College Station too. Yes, sir.
Talking about you just installed in your water and tell them about the gas in the water. We had water that was burned.
Yeah, that's right. If you take a bottle of water and you fill it up with water and you leave about that much headspace and you put your thumb over the bottle and you put a flame right here and you let it go, it will flame up. So, hey, Tenahaw's got good water too. Actually, Greg Grant did that one time. He got our water tested. Daddy never fiddled with it. But Greg said, let me have some of that water. They took it, got it tested, and it was, I think, amongst the saltiest in the state, actually. Well, we didn't use, there at the nursery, we don't use municipal water. We use well water, and it's good. So, other things. All right.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.